Like, comment, and subscribe.
Deep within a dark, whispering forest lived a poor woodcutter, his 2 children, and his new wife. The woodcutter's children were named Hansel and Gretel. Hansel, the elder brother, was clever and protective, while Gretel was gentle, kind, and always hopeful. They lived in a small, crooked cottage made of rough wooden planks, where the cold wind often blew through the cracks in winter. Life had always been hard for the family, but recently a terrible famine spread through the land. Day after day, the cupboards became emptier, and the father's tired hands brought home less and less from the forest. The children's stepmother was a bitter and selfish woman. She resented Hansel and Gretel, seeing them as an extra burden when food was already scarce. One evening, as the children lay awake in their straw beds, they overheard their stepmother speaking sharply to their father. "There is not enough food for all of us," she hissed. "If these children stay, we shall all starve. Tomorrow at dawn, we must take them deep into the forest and leave them there. They will not find their way back, and at least then we will have enough bread for ourselves." The woodcutter's heart ached. He loved his children dearly, but he was weak and afraid of his wife's cruel temper. "Oh, how can I abandon Hansel and Gretel?" he whispered sadly. "They are my flesh and blood." But the stepmother would not listen. With every word, she twisted her husband's guilt until he reluctantly agreed to the wicked plan. Hansel and Gretel, hidden beneath their thin blanket, heard every word. Gretel's small hands trembled as she clutched her brother's arm. "Hansel," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, "what shall we do? We cannot survive alone in the forest." Hansel, though frightened, was clever and determined. He stroked his sister's hair gently. "Do not cry, Gretel," he said with quiet bravery. "I wit it. We'll find a way to protect us. Trust me." His words soothed her, though her heart still pounded with fear. Later that night, when the house was silent and the stepmother's angry snores echoed through the cottage, Hansel slipped quietly out of bed. The moon shone brightly over the forest, painting the earth with silver light. Carefully, Hansel crept outside. Near the cottage path lay smooth, shining white pebbles. They glimmered like tiny stars under the moonlight. Hansel filled his pockets with as many as he could carry. Smiling to himself, he thought, "These stones will guide us home again." He tiptoed back to bed, and when Gretel asked what he had been doing, Hansel whispered, "Do not worry, little sister. Just sleep. God will not abandon us." Gretel trusted her brother's words and closed her eyes, though her dreams were haunted by shadows of the deep woods. As dawn broke, the cruel stepmother shook the children awake roughly. She thrust a small piece of bread into their hands. "Eat this, and be quick," she barked. "We must go into the forest to gather wood." Hansel slipped the bread into his pocket, careful not to let the pebbles fall. Then, hand in hand, Hansel and Gretel followed their parents into the towering dark forest, unaware of the dangerous journey that awaited them. The forest loomed like a living giant as Hansel and Gretel trudged behind their father and stepmother. The tall trees whispered secrets in the wind, their branches twisting like crooked fingers above the children's heads. Birds sang cheerfully at first, but their song soon faded as the path grew darker and the children's small feet stumbled on the uneven ground. The stepmother walked ahead with sharp, impatient steps, her eyes darting back only to glare at the children. The woodcutter, however, walked slower, his shoulders heavy with guilt. He dared not meet Hansel's or Gretel's eyes, for his heart was torn apart by what he was being forced to do. Hansel, though just a boy, was calm and thoughtful. He remembered the white pebbles he had gathered under the moonlight the night before. While the stepmother wasn't looking, he began to let one pebble slip from his hand every few steps. The stones dropped silently onto the path, glimmering faintly in the dim morning light. Gretel noticed what he was doing and whispered in fear, "Hansel, what are you dropping? If she sees, she will be angry." Hansel squeezed her hand gently and whispered back, "Do not worry, little sister. These pebbles will guide us back home when the time comes." Gretel's frightened heart eased a little, for she trusted her brother's cleverness more than anything. At last, after what felt like hours of walking, they reached the thickest part of the forest. The trees here were so tall and tightly packed that sunlight barely touched the ground. The air was cool, damp, and filled with the smell of moss and rotting leaves. The stepmother announced in a false, sweet tone, "Children, rest here while we gather wood. We will come back for you when the bundles are ready." Hansel and Gretel sat together on a large fallen log. Their father lingered nearby, his face pale and sorrowful. He wished desperately to take them back home, but was too weak to defy his wife. Soon the sound of chopping echoed through the trees, chop, chop, chop. But as the minutes turned into hours, the sound grew fainter until it disappeared altogether. The forest grew silent. Gretel's eyes filled with tears. "They are gone, Hansel. They will never come back for us," she cried softly. Hansel wrapped his arm around her. "Do not cry, Gretel. Wait until the moon rises. The stones I dropped will shine like stars, and they will lead us home again." The two children waited patiently, though their stomachs ached with hunger, and fear pressed against their hearts. As the sky darkened and the moon rose high, Hansel stood and pointed to the ground. "Look, Gretel," he said proudly. The little white stones glowed in the moonlight, forming a shining trail that stretched into the distance. Hand in hand, they followed the pebbles, step by step, retracing the path through the dark forest. The stones sparkled as though heaven itself was guiding them. At last, after a long journey, they saw the faint outline of their father's cottage. Their father, who had been weeping in sorrow since he abandoned them, rushed out and embraced them with tears of joy. But in the shadows of the doorway, their stepmother's eyes burned with rage. The cottage glowed warmly in the night, its crooked windows lit by a faint fire inside. Hansel and Gretel ran into their father's arms, their cheeks pressed against his rough, tear-stained face. "My children, my dear children," he sobbed, holding them as if he would never let go. His heart swelled with relief, but guilt still gnawed at him. Gretel clung to him and whispered, "Father, we found our way back because of Hansel." She smiled proudly at her brother, though her eyes still carried the memory of fear. But not everyone welcomed them with joy. The stepmother's face hardened like stone when she saw the children enter. "So they return," she muttered bitterly. Her lips curled in anger, for her wicked plan had failed. "There is not enough food for 4 mouths," she snapped later that night. "If we keep them, we all die. Tomorrow we must try again, and this time they will never come back." The father begged her, his voice trembling. "Please, wife, do not ask this of me again. I cannot bear it." But she silenced him with a glare so cold it seemed to freeze the room. "If you do not do as I say," she hissed, "then it is you I will cast out. Choose wisely." The children, lying in bed, heard her cruel words. Gretel buried her face in her blanket and began to weep. "Hansel, what shall we do? If she takes us again, we may never return." Hansel's sharp mind worked quickly. He whispered softly, "Do not fear, Gretel. If I could find stones once, I shall find them again." His determination shone like a flame, warming his sister's trembling heart. Late that night, Hansel rose quietly and tiptoed to the door. But when he tried to open it, he found it barred tight. The stepmother had locked it with iron strength, anticipating his clever tricks. He pressed his hands against the door in frustration. "This time," he thought grimly, "I must find another way." At dawn, the stepmother shook Hansel and Gretel awake with even less kindness than before. She thrust into their hands small pieces of bread, so thin and hard they barely looked like food. "Eat this, for it is all you shall have today," she sneered. Hansel slipped his piece of bread into his pocket, pretending to save it for later. But as they trudged once again into the forest, he crumbled the bread bit by bit and let the crumbs fall along the path behind them. Gretel noticed his secret act and whispered anxiously, "Brother, what are you doing? This is our only food." Hansel leaned close and whispered back, "Trust me, Gretel, these crumbs will guide us home, just as the stones did before." The stepmother pushed them deeper and deeper into the forest, until the trees grew darker and more twisted than ever. Again, she ordered them to rest beside a fallen tree, while she and the woodcutter went to cut wood. Again, the father's heart ached, but his wife's sharp eyes gave him no chance to resist. Hansel and Gretel sat together, their small hands clasped tightly. The sound of chopping drifted faintly through the forest, chop, 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 but just like before, it faded into silence. Hours passed, and the forest grew cold. Gretel's stomach groaned with hunger. As night fell, she whispered with trembling lips, "Hansel, I am afraid. Do you think the crumbs will shine like the stones?" Hansel hugged her tightly. "When the moon rises, they will be enough. Do not fear, Gretel." But when the moon climbed high and bathed the forest in silver light, Hansel's heart sank. The ground was bare. The breadcrumbs were gone. Every single crumb had been eaten by birds that had followed them silently during the day. Hansel's face fell, but he hid his despair from Gretel. "The birds, they have taken our trail," he said softly. Gretel began to cry, her tears glistening in the moonlight. "What shall we do now, Hansel? We are lost." Hansel looked into the endless darkness of the forest, his heart pounding with fear, but he forced a brave smile. "Do not lose hope, Gretel. We will find a way. We must keep walking, and perhaps we will see a path." And so, hand in hand, they wandered deeper into the forest, their hearts heavy with dread.
The forest at night was no friend to children. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a lurking beast, and every hoot of an owl echoed like a warning. Hansel tried to stay strong for his sister, but even his clever mind could not erase the truth. They were lost. The children walked for hours, their tired feet dragging across the damp earth. The moonlight cast long shadows between the trees, making the forest look like a maze of giants. They stumbled over roots and sharp stones, their stomachs growling louder with every step. At last, Gretel fell to her knees. "Hansel," she whispered weakly, "I cannot walk any further. My legs will not move." Hansel knelt beside her, his own body aching, but his will unbroken. "We will rest here for a little while," he said gently, brushing her hair from her face. "In the morning, perhaps we will find a way home." The children curled up beneath the roots of a large oak tree, shivering in the cold night air. Gretel wept silently, but Hansel held her close, whispering, "I will not let anything happen to you, Gretel. I promise." The night stretched on, long and merciless. Strange sounds filled the forest, distant howls, snapping branches, and the eerie call of night birds. Fear gnawed at them more than hunger, but exhaustion finally pulled them into a restless sleep. When morning came, the children woke to a pale sun breaking through the trees. They searched the ground desperately for any crumbs that might have remained, but the birds had left nothing. Hunger twisted their stomachs as they wandered aimlessly, hoping for a miracle. For 2 days they wandered like this, nibbling on berries they found in the underbrush and sipping water from clear streams. Their clothes grew dirtier, their faces pale. Each step felt heavier than the last. Gretel's hope began to fade, but Hansel still tried to comfort her. "Do not give up, little sister," he said softly. "We are clever, and God will guide us. Somewhere, a path must lead us out." But deep in his heart, Hansel wondered how long they could last in the endless forest, with no trail, no food, and no way home.
The forest seemed endless. Each day Hansel and Gretel wandered further, but the towering trees stretched on like an unbroken wall. Their shoes wore thin, their clothes grew ragged, and hunger gnawed at them like an invisible beast. The children ate what little they could find, bitter berries that puckered their lips, wild herbs that scratched their throats, and cool water from hidden brooks, but it was never enough. Gretel's cheeks grew pale, and her steps grew weaker. "Hansel," she whispered one afternoon, "I do not think we will ever find our way home. Perhaps we are meant to stay here forever." Her voice quivered with despair. Hansel, though just as weary, would not let fear take him. "Do not say that, Gretel. I promised I would protect you. If we keep walking, we will find something. Food, a village, or even our way back. We must not give up." The forest answered only with silence. Every now and then, a strange noise broke the stillness, the snap of a twig, the cry of an owl, or the distant howl of a wolf. The children clung to each other, imagining the dangers that might lurk behind the trees. At night, they huddled beneath roots or curled up against rocks, whispering prayers for safety. On the third night, as they rested beneath a crooked pine tree, Gretel began to cry softly. "I wish Father were here," she said through her tears. "He would never let us starve." Hansel stroked her hair gently, hiding his own tears. "I know he misses us, Gretel. If only he were brave enough to resist her. But we must be strong now, for each other." Morning came with little relief. The sun's light barely pierced the thick canopy, and the air smelled of damp earth. Their bodies ached with hunger, but they pressed on. By the afternoon, Gretel could barely lift her feet. Hansel helped her walk, guiding her with gentle strength, just when despair threatened to crush them complete. Something changed. The trees grew thinner, and a sweet fragrance drifted through the air, warm, sugary, and inviting. Gretel sniffed eagerly. "Hansel, do you smell that? It smells like cake." Hansel's tired eyes lit up. "Yes, it is sweet, like honey." They stumbled forward, their hearts pounding with a strange new hope. Neither knew what awaited them beyond the trees, but for the first time in days, their stomachs urged them forward instead of weighing them down. The children pushed through the last line of trees and gasped. Before them stood the most marvelous sight they had ever seen, a little house, shining in the clearing as though it had sprung from a dream. Its walls were built of golden gingerbread, its roof shingled with rich chocolate, and its windows framed with sparkling sugar panes. Candy canes lined the corners like pillars, and gumdrops sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. Hansel and Gretel stared in disbelief. Their hunger sharpened at the sight, and Gretel clutched Hansel's sleeve. "Brother, do you see it? A house made of sweets." Hansel's eyes widened with wonder. "It is real, Gretel. Look, there are cakes on the windowsill, and bread as soft as clouds on the roof." Without waiting, the starving children rushed forward. Hansel broke off a piece of gingerbread from the wall and stuffed it into his mouth. The taste was sweet and warm, melting on his tongue. Gretel nibbled at the sugar window, her face glowing with delight. For the first time in days, laughter bubbled from their lips. "This is the most wonderful house in the world," Gretel exclaimed. "We will never be hungry again." But as they tore pieces from the magical house, a strange sound interrupted their joy. The door creaked open slowly, and from the shadows stepped an old woman. She was bent with age, her nose hooked, and her eyes glittered under heavy brows. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" she croaked in a sing-song voice. Hansel and Gretel froze in terror. Gretel dropped the piece of sugar she held, while Hansel tried to stand tall, though crumbs covered his lips. We are sorry, good lady," Hansel stammered. "We were hungry and saw your beautiful house." The old woman's frown melted into a smile that seemed kind, though her eyes gleamed strangely. "Oh, you poor dears," she said sweetly. "Come inside, come and sit. There is more food for you within. You need not starve out here." Exhausted and too trusting, the children followed her. Inside, the house was filled with the aroma of baked pies, roasted meat, and warm bread. The table groaned under bowls of milk, fruits, and cakes of every kind. The children ate until their bellies were full, their exhaustion melting into drowsiness. The old woman tucked Gretel into a soft bed and patted Hansel's shoulder. "Rest, children. Tomorrow will be even better." But behind her smile, her mind was already plotting. Morning came, and the children awoke refreshed, believing they had found safety at last. But their joy shattered when the old woman's face twisted into a hideous scowl. She was no kind grandmother, but a wicked witch who had lured them with her sweet house. With terrifying strength, she seized Hansel and dragged him across the room. He shouted and struggled, but the witch shoved him into a sturdy iron cage. The door slammed shut with a metallic clang. "Hansel!" Gretel screamed, rushing forward, But the witch turned on her with fiery eyes. "Be silent, girl. He is mine now." The witch's voice was harsh, her sweet disguise gone. She licked her lips hungrily. "I built this house to lure greedy little children like you. Hansel will grow fat, and when he is ready, I shall feast upon him." Gretel's face drained of color. "No, please, do not hurt my brother." The witch laughed cruelly. "Then you shall serve me, girl. You will cook, clean, and obey my every word. If you disobey, I shall put you in the oven as well." Terrified but helpless, Gretel nodded. She fetched water, cleaned the floor, and prepared meals while her brother remained trapped in the cage. The witch fed Hansel the richest foods, meat, bread, and sweet milk, to fatten him quickly. But Gretel was given nothing but scraps, and her hands grew sore from endless work. Hansel, however, was clever. Each time the witch demanded he stretch out his finger to test if he was growing plump, he held out a thin chicken bone instead. The witch, nearly blind, cursed angrily. "Why is this boy still so thin?" Days passed, and Gretel's heart sank under the witch's cruelty. But she still clung to hope, for she knew Hansel was clever and patient. Together, perhaps they could find a way to outwit the wicked woman who kept them prisoner. Hansel sat behind the cold iron bars of his cage, his face pale, but his spirit unbroken. The witch cackled each morning as she shoved platters of food through the bars, roasted meats, warm loaves of bread, steaming bowls of porridge. She wanted him fattened quickly, like a farmer feeding a pig for slaughter. But Hansel was clever. He remembered the pile of chicken bones left from the witch's meals. Whenever she ordered him to stretch out his finger, he held out one of the thin bones instead. The witch, half-blind and impatient, grumbled each time she felt the finger. "Still skinny? Why is this boy not plumping up?" she shrieked, stamping her crooked foot. Gretel, meanwhile, suffered in silence. The witch gave her only scraps of bread crust and forced her to labor from dawn to dusk. She swept the floors, scrubbed the dishes, and carried buckets of water until her arms ached. Yet every chance she had, she stole glances at her brother's cage. "Do not give up, Hansel," she whispered when the witch's back was turned. Hansel smiled faintly through the bars. "Do not fear for me, Gretel. Be brave. We will escape her, I promise." At night, when the witch snored in her crooked bed, Gretel would sneak closer to her brother. They whispered through the bars, hatching plans and keeping hope alive. Still, as days stretched into weeks, despair weighed heavier on them. The witch grew angrier each day that Hansel remained thin. She muttered darkly to herself about ovens and roasts, her shadow flickering against the walls like a demon. Hansel's clever trick could not last forever.
The days dragged on, and Gretel grew weaker from hunger and endless toil. She scrubbed until her hands cracked, carried heavy wood until her back ached, and yet the witch only scolded and shouted. One evening, after the witch had retired to her room, Gretel sank onto a stool by the fireplace. Her tears spilled silently as she buried her face in her hands. "I cannot do this anymore," she whispered. "I am too weak. Hansel will be taken from me, and I will never see father again." Hansel's voice came softly from his cage. "Do not cry, Gretel. You are stronger than you believe. You must not lose hope." "But how?" she sobbed. "She is too powerful. She has the key, the cage, and the oven. We are only children." Hansel reached through the bars, his fingers brushing hers. "That is true, but she underestimates us. She thinks we are helpless. That is our strength. One day, she will make a mistake, and we must be ready." His words lit a spark in Gretel's heart. She dried her tears and nodded firmly. "Then I will wait. And when the time comes, I will act." The following morning, the witch hobbled out, her temper fiercer than ever. She pinched Hansel's arm and growled, still thin as a twig. "I have no patience left. Tomorrow, I shall feast on him whether he is fat or not." Gretel froze, her blood running cold. Tomorrow. The word echoed in her mind like a death knell. she knew that time had run out. If they were to survive, the chance must come soon. That night, as she lay awake on her straw bed, Gretel whispered a prayer. God, give me courage. Help me save my brother. And in her heart, determination bloomed.
The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself mourned what was about to happen. The witch rose early, her crooked figure moving briskly about the kitchen. She barked orders at Gretel, her eyes burning with greed. "Fetch water, girl! Stoke the fire! Heat the oven until it roars with flame! Tonight I shall feast like a queen!" Gretel obeyed, her hands trembling as she carried wood and fanned the fire. The oven's mouth yawned wide, glowing orange as heat spread through its iron belly. Smoke curled upward, stinging her eyes. The witch clapped her hands in glee. "When the oven is ready, I shall bake the boy, and after that, perhaps I shall taste you too." Gretel's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. She remembered Hansel's words, "She will make a mistake. Be ready." The witch leaned closer, her voice low and wicked. "Do not dawdle, girl. Stick your head inside the oven and see if it is hot enough. I want it blazing for a feast." Gretel's hands shook. Her knees nearly buckled, but she steadied herself. "I do not know how to check it, mistress," she said timidly. "How should I do it?" The witch snarled in impatience. "Stupid girl! Must I do everything myself?" She waddled toward the oven, bent forward, and thrust her head inside to show Gretel. At that moment Gretel's eyes blazed with sudden courage. The chance had come. Her hands gripped the heavy iron door. The witch leaned into the oven, muttering about fire and smoke. Her crooked back arched as she peered into the blazing flames. For a brief moment, Gretel froze, fear paralyzing her. Could she really do it? Could she destroy this wicked creature? Then she heard Hansel's weak voice from the cage. "Now, Gretel, be brave." Something fierce surged through Gretel's heart. With every ounce of strength, she shoved the witch forward. The hag shrieked, her gnarled hands clawing at the edges of the iron door, but Gretel pushed harder, slamming the door shut with a deafening clang. The witch's screams filled the room, echoing against the walls, then grew weaker and weaker, until silence fell. Gretel collapsed to her knees, trembling with shock. The smell of smoke and burnt wood filled the air. For a moment she could scarcely breathe, but then Hansel's voice called from the cage again, stronger this time. "Gretel, you did it! You saved us!" Her fear melted into relief. She leapt to her feet, grabbed the iron key hanging on the wall, and rushed to the cage. With shaky hands, she unlocked the door, and Hansel stumbled out. They embraced tightly, tears streaming down their faces. "Oh, Hansel," Gretel whispered, "I thought I would lose you." "You saved me," Hansel replied, his voice choked with emotion. "You were the brave one." The siblings looked around the witch's house. It was strangely quiet now, as though the evil that had haunted it for years had vanished with its mistress. But their relief turned into astonishment when they discovered a hidden chest beneath the witch's bed. Inside lay piles of gold coins, sparkling jewels, and pearls that glittered like captured stars. The witch had hoarded treasures stolen from countless children who had fallen into her trap. Hansel's eyes widened. "With this, Father will never be poor again. We can finally live in peace." Gretel nodded, her face glowing with hope. "Let us take as much as we can carry." And so, the children filled their pockets in a small sack with riches, their hearts light for the first time in weeks. At last, they turned away from the cursed house of sweets, stepping back into the open air of the forest. But though they were free, their journey was not yet over. The forest still loomed vast around them, and the road home was uncertain. Yet Hansel and Gretel were no longer helpless children. They were survivors, braver and stronger than before. The forest felt different now. Though the trees still towered and the shadows stretched long, Hansel and Gretel no longer trembled as they walked. The weight of gold and jewels in their pockets gave them courage. But more than that, the knowledge that they had conquered the witch filled them with strength. "Do you think we will find Father soon?" Gretel asked, her voice filled with longing. Hansel nodded firmly. Yes, the forest cannot keep us forever. We have faced worse than hunger and wolves. We will find our way. For days they traveled. They followed streams, crossed meadows, and avoided the darkest parts of the woods. Sometimes they slept beneath trees, sometimes in caves, always clinging to each other for warmth. Hunger still gnawed at them, but they found berries, roots, and the occasional rabbit or bird to roast over a small fire. One afternoon, as they crossed a wide clearing, they stumbled upon a small pond, its surface shimmering like glass. Gretel bent down to drink, but Hansel noticed something unusual. On the far side of the pond stood a swan, its feathers pure white, its eyes gentle. It seemed to watch them with a knowing gaze. When they circled the pond, they discovered it was far too deep and wide to cross. Gretel's shoulders sagged. How will we ever reach the other side? The swan glided gracefully toward them, then lowered its broad back as if inviting them to climb on. Hansel's eyes lit with wonder. Perhaps it will carry us across. Cautiously, the children climbed onto the swan's back. To their amazement, the great bird bore their weight easily and carried them across the shimmering pond. When they reached the other side, Gretel whispered in awe, "It is as though heaven itself sent this swan to help us." Hansel smiled. "We are meant to find our way home." And so they pressed on, the forest thinning with each step. The days grew brighter as Hansel and Gretel continued their journey. The dense trees gave way to familiar clearings, and the air smelled fresher, lighter, as though guiding them closer to home. "Look, Hansel," Gretel said one morning, pointing at a crooked old oak. "Do you remember? We passed that tree when Father first led us into the woods." Hansel's heart leapt. "Yes, we are near." With renewed energy, they hurried along paths that stirred faint memories. Their small cottage could not be far now. Still, a shadow of doubt lingered. Would Father still be there? Would the stepmother greet them with anger once again? At last, one evening as the sun sank low, they saw smoke curling gently into the sky. They rushed forward, and through the thinning trees, the outline of their father's humble cottage appeared. Gretel's eyes filled with tears. "Home," she whispered. "We are home." The door creaked open, and their father stumbled out. His face was thinner, older, marked with sorrow, but when he saw his children, his eyes widened in disbelief. "My children!" he cried, rushing to them. He knelt, gathering them into his arms, and wept openly. "I thought I had lost you forever." Hansel clung to him, his voice thick with emotion. "We are here, Father, and we will never leave you again." Gretel pulled the small sack from her shoulder and spilled the glittering treasures into his hands. "We are safe now, Father. We brought riches. We will never starve again." Tears streamed down the woodcutter's cheeks. "Bless you, my dear ones. You have saved us all." The stepmother, however, was nowhere to be seen. In their absence, her cruelty had driven her away, or perhaps claimed her fate. The children did not ask where she had gone, for her shadow no longer hung over their lives. That night, for the first time in years, the cottage was filled with warmth, laughter, and hope. The long nightmare had ended.
That night, the woodcutter's humble cottage glowed with a light it had not known in many long years. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, the table was spread with bread and roasted meat that Hansel and Gretel had carried from the witch's hoard, and laughter rang in the air. The children sat beside their father, telling him everything, how the stepmother had forced him to abandon them, how they had left pebbles to find their way back, how the birds had eaten their crumbs, and finally how the witch had lured them with her gingerbread house. The woodcutter listened with wide eyes, grief etched across his features. "My poor children," he whispered, clutching their hands. "I was blind, weak, and let myself be swayed by her wickedness. I shall never forgive myself for what I allowed." Hansel shook his head gently. "Do not blame yourself, Father. She forced you. And we are safe now. That is what matters." Gretel leaned against him, her eyes shining. "We are together again, and we have enough to never be hungry. That is all we wanted." The woodcutter hugged them tightly, his tears falling into their hair. For years, he had been crushed beneath the weight of poverty and his wife's cruelty. Now, for the first time in so long, he felt free. The days that followed were filled with joy. With the treasures Hansel and Gretel had brought, the little cottage became a place of comfort. The woodcutter bought food, mended the roof, and repaired the broken tools of his trade. No longer did they live in fear of hunger. Hansel took pride in helping his father with the woodcutting, his young arms growing strong. Gretel, always kind and gentle, tended to the hearth and filled the home with warmth. Their father sang again as he worked, his voice carrying through the forest like it had in happier days. Though the memory of the witch lingered, it did not haunt them. Instead, it became a story of triumph, a reminder that courage, cleverness, and love could overcome even the darkest evil. Often, Gretel would sit by the fire and whisper to Hansel, "Do you remember how afraid we were?" Hansel would nod and smile. "Yes. But we faced it together. That is why we are here now." And Gretel would say softly, "Together, we can face anything." The forest around them, once a place of terror, now seemed gentler. Birds sang sweetly in the branches, deer moved quietly among the trees, and the air smelled of pine and fresh earth. No longer did Hansel and Gretel see it as a place of abandonment, it was simply their home, and they were no longer lost within it. As for the stepmother, she never returned. Whether she perished in the woods or simply fled forever, no one knew. But her absence was a blessing, and none of them mourned her, and so the little family lived in peace. Their cottage was small, their lives simple, but their hearts were rich with love and gratitude. The trials of the past had forged them strong, and no misfortune could ever tear them apart again. Hansel, Gretel, and their father, together at last, would never again know the pain of hunger, fear, or abandonment. Instead, they lived out their days with joy, their story passed down through the ages as a tale of bravery and hope, and thus, Hansel and Gretel's journey, born in sorrow and danger, ended in love, courage, and a home restored.